So, my favorite saints.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind when I think of that is why saints at all? And when I think of that, I think of these centers of excellence that have been created around the world these days. And that one of the first pieces of advice they give people when they come to centers of excellence is to have someone who you admire that does extremely well in what you'd like to excel at, and focus upon that person's behavior, and that will assist you in achieving your goals. Well, I think the same principle applies here. And by the way, on that one, so you may have seen one of the latest ads for Tim Hortons, where Wayne Gretzky is reviewing the memorabilia that his father has collected, and he locates in that the signature of Tim Horton when Wayne was a young boy coming to his town of Brampton and saying that changed his life. Well, it's the same principle here with the saints. So for my case, I'd start first with the saint after whom I was named, is John the Baptist. And what I can get from him is his devotion to God, that he made God the center of his life. And for those of us who feel that that is something that we should be aspiring to, there's no one better for me than John the Baptist. And then you see how this manifests in his life, how John was so courageous and stood up to whatever powers that be. In the end, it cost him his life, but he was willing to do that in support of the beliefs that he upheld. So he's one. I have others too that I regard as saints who haven't been named saints yet, but I think should be or will be. For starters, Jean Vanier. I don't doubt that someday he will be. And Jean has a particular place in my heart because my youngest sister is a member of their community and has been for some 30 years. And but even more than that, John's own sort of devotion and his giving of himself to a cause which has raised the status of disabled people worldwide, and illustrates to me the power that one individual can have who is aligned with God. So there are two. I could add Dorothy Day, who is another of my favorites. Again, an individual who isn't yet, but she is up for canonization. But again, it's somebody who is strong and illustrates how when you give yourself over to God, God assists you in accomplishing all kinds of things which you yourself never thought you were capable of doing. And she, numbers of times, would tell people just that, how given her own capacity, she probably never could have done half of what she achieved, and yet with God's assistance, there it is. So those are just a few of my favorites.
Hi, I am Caitlin. I work here at St. Thomas More College in the Engaged Learning Office. The saint I'd like to talk about today, one of my favorites, is Theresa of Avila. She is actually my confirmation saint. The reason I chose her as a confirmation saint is because of a story about her I read in my religion textbook when I was probably in grade 4, I want to say, so a couple of years before confirmation. We got confirmed when we were 11 back in the olden days. And the story about her that I really loved is, I believe it's apocryphal, so I don't know if there's any historical evidence of this, but She fell off a donkey crossing a stream, and the legend has it that after she fell off the donkey into the water, she looked up at the heavens and said to God, "This is why you have so few friends, if this is how you treat them." And there was something about that I really responded to, that a couple of things. One, that she had this sort of personal relationship with God where that was something she would feel comfortable saying, and also that she was the sort of person who would say that to God. And I thought that there was something so beautiful and so human and also so strong about that. So that was my first encounter with Theresa of Avila. And so based on that story alone, honestly, I chose her as my confirmation saint. As time went on, I learned more and more about her, and she was a mystic. She did a whole bunch of work reforming a particular order of nuns, and was a very, very strong person who had both a real practical impact on the lives of religious, but also had a really strong spiritual and kind of scholarly bent to her as well. And when I was a little bit older, I remember I was taking an early modern Europe class, and there was a quotation at the top of one of my textbooks from her, and it was a letter she wrote to Philip II of Spain. And the class, at that point, we were talking about the divine right of kings. And to Philip II of Spain, who, you have to remember, owned all of Spain and also the Netherlands, so one of the most powerful people in Europe, she said, "Let us not forget that Saul was also a king anointed by God." And so it was just like this incredible power in her, that this really strong sense of conviction, this really strong sense of righteousness, in the best possible use of that term, that she didn't care what it meant for her. She was going to follow what was good and what was right. And she's now one of the doctors of the church. There aren't a lot of women who are doctors of the church. And so as a role model for me as a Catholic woman, she has been incredibly important. One of the things that has emerged kind of later is a conversation I've had with my sister when she was reading The Interior Castle and learning more about Theresa of Avila herself. And she said, we had this conversation about how our confirmation saints kind of guide us, whether we are aware of it or not. Because the more she read about Theresa, the more she was like, "Caitlin, you are so much like her. She is clearly so much a part of your charism, so much a part of your life." Because one of the reforms actually she had is that all of her nuns were vegetarian, and so my sister was just kind of like, "This is incredible that that you didn't know any of these things about this saint when you chose her as your confirmation saint, but she's clearly been like walking with you along your life." And so, to me, she's an incredibly, incredibly important figure in my life, both personally and spiritually.
Hello, my name is Brian. I've been coming out to Newman Retreat for many years. Michael asked me a while ago if I had a favorite saint, and as a Mennonite, we don't usually know very much about saints or necessarily have favorite saints, so I don't think he was expecting me to say yes, but that's the answer that I gave. And I have a favorite saint. His name is Saint Telemachus, also known as Alamachus, spelt with an A, whereas the other is T-E-L-E, oddly enough. But anyways, Saint Telemachus lived a long time ago, at the end of the 300s, beginning of the 400s. And he was a monk who traveled to Rome and went to the gladiatorial games, where he was horrified to see that people were killing each other for entertainment. And upon seeing this, he rushed out onto the field of battle to try to stop the gladiators from killing each other. And there's a couple versions of the story as to how this ended. You might gather it probably isn't going to end well, and both stories are bad endings, I guess. The one ending is that the gladiators killed him. Stands to reason, but I think probably the more likely result was that actually the crowd stoned him for trying to take away their entertainment. They weren't pleased with this, and the result though doesn't end there. The story doesn't end there. because the emperor heard about this and it gave him pause. And I think initially he said, well, let's just have a recess, have a break in the gladiatorial games. We'll cancel them for now and think about this. And they were never started again. So that's how the gladiatorial games came to an end, from Saint Telemachus's action and horror at what was happening. And of course, as a Mennonite, I am, and as a philosopher, I'm very aware of the fact that people criticize pacifism as being useless, that if you don't use coercion to stand up to coercion, the bad guys win. And to me, the story of Telemachus illustrates that isn't necessarily so. I know that things didn't end well for Telemachus himself, and yet look at the great good that he's done for the world, in that this kind of entertainment has never really restarted. So I think the moral of the story is that we don't know always the big picture, but I think some very good things can happen, even if you're a pacifist and even if you don't coerce others into being pacifists. I'm done.
So hi, I'm Chris. I'm department head of religion and culture, and I also teach I teach religious studies, peace studies, and social justice and the common good, and Catholic studies. I have two saints that have been influential in my life, and I'll talk first about Saint Francis. So I knew Saint Francis as my favorite saint from when I was very, very young. When I grew up in Montreal for my confirmation name, so even though I was Ukrainian Catholic, I was erroneously confirmed in my Catholic school, and I chose Francis as my confirmation name. What attracted me to Francis were just the stories about him being connected to caring for creation and also caring for the poor. Do you want to know more?
Sure, if you'd like.
Yeah, so I really liked, something that's been really important to me lately because I've studied ecological ethics is I love that story of Francis preaching to the birds. And I remember hearing that story and not, thinking about it in different ways throughout my life. But now I'm really interested in the idea that he was actually preaching to the birds and having maybe a dialogue with the birds, so that it'd be multi-directional. So the story shows that obviously that the gospel doesn't just belong to human people, but to all of creation, and there's power that extends beyond the human in the gospel, and that the animals can also participate in who is saved and who is redeemed and what is going forward. I love the stories of St. Francis's simplicity and kind of the challenge and dangerous memory he represents for the church, calling us back towards something simpler, better, basic, more Christ-like. Taking on the image of the poor Christ, I think, is a really powerful image.
I'm Carl Still, and I'm a faculty member here at St. Thomas More College, and I also serve now as president of the college. And the saint I'd like to talk to you about today is St. Thomas Aquinas. I'm sure you've probably heard of him. In fact, originally St. Thomas More College was going to be named St. Thomas Aquinas College. And why St. Thomas Aquinas? He's probably the most famous Catholic theologian of all time, up there with St. Augustine or John Henry Newman. He was an exceptionally powerful intellect. There didn't seem to be any question that he couldn't tackle, and he tackled just about every question that existed in his time. So that's one thing I admire about him, not just the intellect, but his willingness to tackle any and every question that was a live question at his time. And he also used reason in his theology. Theology for him is not just a matter of faith or believing. It's a matter of proving what can be proven and arguing against positions that would seem to undermine faith. So he had a healthy respect for the difference between reasoning and faith, but he used reasoning about as fully as you can in developing a faith. And that's why if you've taken a philosophy class at STM or elsewhere, you probably encountered Thomas Aquinas at some point. His thought really does continue to resonate in our world today. Now, when I say that Thomas Aquinas was a medieval theologian, You might think that he was only interested in Christianity and what's in the Bible. One of the interesting things about Aquinas is that he draws on sources from every tradition that he knows about. So he draws on ancient Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers. He certainly draws on Jewish thinkers, even after the time of scriptural writings. He draws on Islamic thinkers, and he has great respect for all of the sources that he uses. He considers them all potential sources for truth, and he tries to weave them together into a kind of synthesis of theological thought. But he doesn't discriminate against different traditions and reject them simply because they're outside of his tradition. He sees truth expressing itself in many different traditions. That's another thing I admire about Aquinas. The other thing I admire about Aquinas is, as intellectual as he was, as smart as he was also a very humble individual of really deep faith. And that faith seems to have started even when he was a very young boy. When he was 5 years old, apparently he asked someone, "What is God?" And people say that's when he began thinking about God for the first time. He decided early in life he wanted to join a religious order. His family didn't like the choice he made. They wanted him to go to a different religious order, but he stuck with the Dominicans, which were a new religious order. And he really distinguished himself as one of the great Dominicans of all time. So we often see Aquinas as a thinker, writing about deep questions. He spent a lot of time in prayer, a lot of time reading scripture. He spent time preaching and teaching, but it's that combination of such a clear, powerful mind and at the same time such a humble, devout soul. The combination of those two things, which is so rare and so powerful, that I think is what I admire most about St. Thomas Aquinas. Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Henri Biaï-Manfou, and I'm a professor of French at St. Thomas More College, so at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm here to talk about my saint, my favorite, by the way, and who is actually Padre Pio, who is well known as Francesco Forgione. Padre Pio, and I like him a lot, and because he actually helped me, and grow in my faith. I didn't have a chance to know him physically, but I was very, very fortunate to read extensively about his story, and also especially about his stigmata. And then also because in spite of all of the hardships, all of the difficulties that he actually went through, he never gave up. And then, for example, in the 1920s, he was prevented from performing his priestly duties by the Catholic Church. But in spite of that, and then despite all those difficulties, he never actually gave up. He kept on putting his trust in the Lord. And then at one point in time, he was actually viewed, even described as someone who was not really, was sick, was not mentally actually fit to perform his duties, but he never actually gave up. And in 1999, he was beatified and then canonized a couple of years later, especially in 2002. So he was born in 1887, and then he died in 1968, which is a very, very important year, especially and in the life of actually humanity. And so Padre Pio, and I really like him a lot, and he's forever actually remain my saint. Thank you.
There it is. I guess, I don't know, I like the warrior saints. Isn't that a bit of an oxymoron? Hey, and not just because you're Michael and I'm Michael. I quite like Saint Michael.
Oh yeah.
Right, I quite like Saint Michael, and I've often wondered. I don't know how angels matriculate to sainthood as well, right? But we have angels who are designated saints, and Michael's one of them. I quite like Saint Michael. As a kid, I really liked Saint Francis. That's my confirmation name. I don't know that we we do confirmation names anymore. I gave my kids, or they helped pick their confirmation names, but it wasn't a big thing in the diocese here this go around. But my confirmation name is Francis, and I like St. Francis probably because as an 11 or 12-year-old, whenever I was confirmed, I quite liked animals, and I liked all the animal stories. That really appeals to young people, I think. When I was in graduate school, I was doing a compulsory canon law course, and I learned from the prof, who was a High Church Anglican fellow, that St. Raymond of Peñaforte, I don't know how to say the place name, was the patron saint of canon lawyers. And I had another prof who pointed out that of all the popes who were lawyers, none of them are saints, right? So I don't know how true that is either, at least of the medieval popes, right? But I quite honestly believe that Saint Raymond of Peñaforte, however you'd say the place name, I think he got me through. He got me through that canon law course. So maybe I'm a multi-user of the saints, right? I go to the saints when I need them. St. Anthony, of course, is very helpful to me as I age because I forget things, I lose things. I don't know which St. Anthony we ask to help us find stuff because there's more than one, right? Absolutely. But of them all now, I fall back quite a lot on St. Michael. Right, I ask St. Michael not just because St. Michael is my namesake, if you will, but in this troublesome time, I feel we are beset, and we need a defender. We need a champion. And it could also be that I'm a medievalist by inclination and training, and I like all the chivalric literature and knights and stuff and so on. And of course, as you might imagine, St. Michael would figure prominently for medieval Christian knights. But Alan Reese and I used to always joke that, we got some really good things, but a lot of these medieval people, they didn't go far enough with their Christianity, right? Or maybe they went off in a direction that wasn't perhaps as kind or peaceful or productive as it could have been. I don't think that would disqualify St. Michael. I don't think so, right? His is a cosmic battle. It's important stuff. And then, of course, there's that movie, Michael. Have you seen it with John Travolta? Right, which is so bad it's good, right? It's horrible, but it's wonderful. And he's just he puts sugar on his cereal, and he's a slob, and he charges bulls with his head and stuff. It's hilarious. Yeah, so I like that kind of stuff too.
Okay. I'd add St. Basil too, and that's because I'm a member of the Basilian Fathers, and we have Basil as our patron. He wasn't our founder. The real Basilian Fathers have him as their founder. They're Eastern Church. They'd be Father Andre's church. But Basil, one of the reasons Basil was chosen, one of the reasons I particularly like him too, is the breadth of his understanding of God's life in the world. And one illustration of that is in a letter to a young man who was considering being a Christian. Basil said to him, in order to be a good Christian, you must study the classics. Not necessarily Christian classic, but the Greek classics, because Basil was of the opinion that whatever is good, whatever is valuable, whatever is admirable is of God. And we should incorporate that within our perspective of God. So that kind of breadth, applied broadly, always draws me to Basil.
really briefly. So St. Ignatius was very important to me from grade 7 on, because I went to Jesuit high schools, and actually the first high school I went to in Montreal, where it starts in the equivalent of grade 7, was Loyola High School. And so St. Ignatius is from Loyola. He started the Jesuits, and the story I really like about him is also his conversion from being sort of into like military type things to actually reading a book of the saints and then being moved by that, and then devoting his life to Christ. So I find that very powerful. I also like what he particularly did in that life of engaging people in ideas and education, and it thought of education as very important and something that can be instrumental in transforming society for the better.
Hi, my name is Alicia Palmazan, and I am here at STM today, and I am the Judaic Studies professor here at the Department of Religion and Culture. My favorite saint often changes, but I think that my favorite overall saint would be Mary, the Mother of Jesus. I don't think that I really experienced Mary as my favorite saint until probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I started doing work with the Congregation of Our Lady of Zion, a Roman Catholic congregation of sisters, and this congregation is known for its work on Jewish-Christian relations, and so I really got to know them through that. And in 2014 I went to Israel and spent a lot of time with the congregation and working in the area of Jerusalem on Jewish-Christian relations, and I developed a lot of relationships at that particular point in time. And with the congregation, who is named after the particular understanding of Mary that grows up in the land of Israel, I really started to associate Mary with relationships, and relationships with the people around me and what I actually did for my living, but actually living through my living. And so I spent a lot of time studying Mary, but then also praying with Mary, and she really helped me through the time that I was sick and the time after, so healing. And so I also relate that back to my grandmother, who had a particular devotion to Our Lady of Fatima. And there was always this kind of understanding also of Our Lady of Lourdes in our household as well. And so my understanding of Mary really grows from that understanding of Fatima, suffering, and Lourdes, healing, as well as my understanding of Mary of Israel, and so the daughter of the Jewish people. And I think more than that is through my studies understanding that multiplicity of relationships can exist. She's mother, she's daughter, she's a kick-ass warrior, and whatever you need, she's there to support you. And so that is where my devotion comes from now, is understanding that multiplicity. So thank you.